I'm Aubrey Bennett Pierce, and let me tell you a story. A story about legacy, betrayal, and the quiet power of reclaiming what was once lost. For years, I lived as a ghost in my own family, the daughter of a man whose name carried weight in Boston's elite circles, but whose death left me with nothing more than a stack of tuition bills and a heart full of unanswered questions. When my father remarried, I thought I might gain a new mother and a sister. Instead, I was slowly erased, pushed aside by the very people who were meant to welcome me in. Every room in that house echoed with silences I couldn't fill. So I left. I built a life beyond their reach. I found love, purpose, and a voice they had once tried to silence, but the past has a way of calling you back. When an ivory envelope arrived, an invitation to a gala designed to humiliate me, I made a choice. To walk back in, not as a victim, but as the woman they could no longer ignore. This is my story. Chapter 1. The Galley. I shouldn't have attended. You're just a gallery assistant, Victoria's voice rang out. You don't belong here. And yet, here I was, standing in the heart of Boston's elite, holding the one invitation that would change everything. The chandeliers in the Rosewood Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like 1,000 tiny stars. Every table was dressed in ivory linens, flanked by crystal stemware and gold-rimmed plates. Waiters glided between the guests like dancers in a well-rehearsed ballet. The annual Boston Children's Hospital Gala was one of the city's most exclusive events, a place where the rich came not only to donate, but to be seen. And tonight, I was supposed to be invisible. My palms were slick against the velvet clutch I gripped. Inside it, the embossed invitation from the Matthews Family Foundation gleamed mockingly beneath a folded handwritten note. Harper, it's been too long. We should reconnect. The family misses you. Signed, Victoria. A calculated move masked as warmth. I knew better than to believe it. But still, I had come. Not for Victoria. Not for the family that had cast me out 6 years ago. I was here for myself. For the girl who had once been left behind, desperate for approval. Tonight, I would face them as a woman who owed them nothing. The hostess herself stood beneath the largest chandelier, surrounded by Boston's social elite. Victoria Pierce Bennett, my stepmother, was as polished as ever in a sleek emerald gown, her signature blonde bob perfectly in place. Her daughter Madeline, 2 years my junior but perpetually preserved in youthful perfection, stood at her side in a crimson dress designed to attract every lens in the room. I kept my movements measured, shoulders back, chin high. If they thought I would cower or run, they were mistaken. The first familiar face I spotted was Aunt Patricia, my father's cousin, who had once loved to braid my hair and sneak me cookies under the table. Tonight, she eyed me as if I were a ghost. "Harper?" she blinked. "Is that you?" "It's Aubrey now." "Aubrey Bennett Pierce," I corrected softly, a stiff smile. "Ah, yes. Married, I hear. We weren't expecting you this evening." No, they hadn't been. I wasn't part of their carefully curated guest list. My invitation had been a trap. A test to see if I dare show my face. I moved toward the center of the ballroom, past old acquaintances whose polite smiles thinned at my approach. The whispers were inevitable. "She's here alone. Did you hear she married that tech CEO? Why would Victoria invite her? Because humiliation was an old family sport. One Victoria played well." A sharp, familiar voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Aubrey!" Victoria called, her tone syrup-sweet but loud enough to draw attention. "What a surprise. I wasn't sure you'd come." I turned slowly to face her. "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, steady. "The Children's Hospital is such an important cause." "Oh, indeed," she said, eyes glittering, though I must admit, I didn't think gallery assistants had time for galas. The words landed like darts, each designed to provoke. Beside her, Madeline smirked openly, phone in hand. I caught a glimpse of the screen, already recording. My pulse spiked, but I held my ground. Before I could speak, Uncle William, already red-faced from champagne, boomed from nearby. Well, look who's returned. We thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth after your father's funeral. I met his gaze without flinching. Life keeps one busy. He laughed. Family is everything, you know. Family, I thought bitterly. The same family that had watched me pack my childhood room into boxes after my father's will had left me with nothing but tuition money and a pat on the head. As I opened my mouth to respond, Victoria's voice cut in again, bright and theatrical. "Oh, I must make a quick announcement before dinner," she said, already moving toward the stage. A cold prickle crawled up my spine. I glanced at my watch. 15 minutes. That's all I needed to hold on until Graham arrived. My anchor. My reminder that I wasn't the lost girl they remembered. Not anymore. I forced my breath to slow as I watched Victoria glide onto the stage. The band fell silent. Crystal clinked faintly as the room hushed in expectation. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out, bright and composed, "I want to thank you all for joining us this evening to support the incredible work of Boston Children's Hospital." A smattering of applause followed. "And before dinner is served," she continued, eyes gleaming, "I'd like to acknowledge all those working behind the scenes tonight, our event planners, our catering team," she smiled, "and of course, our serving staff." There was polite applause again. Then her gaze flicked directly to me. A pause, just long enough. A chill swept down my spine. "In fact," she went on, voice lifting with theatrical innocence, "I believe there may have been a small mix-up this evening. One of our waitstaff seems to have misplaced her uniform." The words landed like a slap. A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the room. Heads turned, dozens of eyes locked onto me. Stay calm, I told myself. Don't let her see you break. Victoria's expression was pure, practiced concern. "Harper, oh, excuse me." "Aubrey? Did you get confused about your role tonight?" Guests were asked to arrive through the main entrance. The service staff was scheduled earlier this afternoon. My cheeks burned. The room tilted for a moment. I could see Madeline poised just behind her mother, phone camera trained on me, smirking. She planned this, I thought. She planned it all. I forced my chin higher. "I was invited," I said clearly, though my voice trembled ever so slightly. "I have the invitation." Gasps and murmurs rippled again. Victoria's smile never faltered. "I'm sure you do, dear. We send courtesy copies to extended family. But sometimes misunderstandings happen." She turned to the corner of the room and gestured. "Michael, would you mind assisting?" A tall security guard with a kind face but professional stance approached. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm going to need to ask you to come with me." "I am not leaving," I replied, steel sharpening my tone. "I was invited to this event, officially." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the embossed invitation. "Here, you can see for yourself." Michael took it, frowning as he read. His gaze flicked uncertainly toward the stage, where Victoria watched like a hawk. "Mrs. Pierce," he began, but Victoria cut in smoothly. "That's just a ceremonial copy," she said, voice carrying over the murmurs, "not an actual guest listing." "I'm afraid she's mistaken," Uncle William chimed in from across the floor, "always trying to be something she's not." Laughter followed, louder this time. I gripped the clutch tighter to stop my hands from shaking. "Don't cry. Don't let them win." Michael shifted uneasily. "Ma'am, please. Let's not cause a scene." "Of course," Victoria said with mock sympathy. "Let's be gentle. She is family, technically speaking." The word technically sliced deeper than any of the barbs before. Madeline's voice chimed in from behind her phone. "Maybe she just wanted to see how the other half lives for a night. I felt my breath catch, anger and humiliation battling in my chest. "No," I said firmly, lifting my chin once more. "I came here because I belong here. My father built this foundation. I have every right to be present." Victoria's mask slipped just for a moment, a flash of venom behind the polished smile. "Michael," she said crisply, "escort her out." Michael hesitated. "No," she ordered. I felt Michael's gentle hand on my elbow. From the crowd, I heard Uncle William again. Thomas would be so disappointed. Thomas Bennett, my father. Their final weapon, grief and fury, surged through me. I blinked back the sting of tears. As Michael began guiding me toward the doors, I glanced at my watch again. 10 minutes. Just 10 more. "Please," I whispered to Michael. "I have someone coming. My husband." Michael's brows lifted in surprise. "Your husband?" "Yes," I said firmly. "He'll be here soon. Please." "Just let me wait." Behind us, Victoria's voice rang out again, for the crowd's benefit. "Family tragedy, really. Some people just never find their place." The words echoed in my ears as the ballroom doors loomed closer. "Hold on," I told myself again. Graham will come. He always comes. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, hope was the only armor I had left. Will Graham arrive in time to turn the tide before they forced Aubrey out in disgrace? And when the people meant to protect you become the ones who humiliate you, how do you find the strength to stand your ground? Stay with us, because in Chapter 2, the deeper scars of betrayal will come to light, and Aubrey's fight for dignity has only just begun. Chapter 2, The Family That Erased Me. Family is everything, they used to say. Except when it wasn't. Not when I needed them the most. The weight of my father's name still lingered in the air as Michael guided me toward the grand ballroom doors. My grip on the velvet clutch tightened, knuckles pale. 10 more minutes, I reminded myself. Just hold on. But even as I counted the seconds, the tide of memories rushed forward, unbidden, unstopped. I had been 8 when my world began to unravel. Back then, my mother's laughter still echoed through the halls of our brownstone in Beacon Hill. Jessica Bennett had been the heart of our family, warm, fiercely intelligent, and graceful under the constant scrutiny of Boston's elite. My father, Richard Bennett, adored her, and for a time we were whole. Until cancer arrived like a thief in the night. It was swift, brutal. Within 6 months, she was gone, and with her, the light in my father's eyes. I remember standing at the edge of her hospital bed, clutching her hand so tightly the nurses had to pry my fingers free. After that, the house changed. My father buried himself in work, leaving me adrift among nannies who couldn't replicate the gentle rhythm of my mother's love. I grew quieter, smaller, hoping he might notice the girl who still waited for bedtime stories and piano lessons that never came. 2 years later, Victoria Pierce arrived. She swept into our lives on a tide of emerald silk and perfume, dazzling at a charity gala where my father had spoken about the hospital's new pediatric wing. Widowed, glamorous, and well-connected, Victoria charmed everyone, especially my father. I wanted to believe in her smile. I wanted to believe that maybe she could fill the space my mother had left behind. I was wrong. The shift was gradual at first. Subtle. Madeline and I were the same age. On paper, sisters now. But from the moment Victoria and her daughter moved into our home, the unspoken hierarchy became clear. Madeline got the larger bedroom. I was asked to understand. She needed more space for her things. When holidays came, her gifts sparkled under the tree while mine were sparse and practical. At school events, Victoria ensured Madeline was front and center. I stood off to the side, smiling politely, pretending it didn't sting. And my father? He retreated further, letting Victoria orchestrate our lives. She was adept at scheduling family outings when I had commitments, then whispering to him that Aubrey simply wasn't interested in participating. "I'm trying so hard with her," I overheard Victoria say one evening, voice thick with fabricated tears. But she won't let me in. And my father, exhausted, guilt-ridden, simply nodded. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned the rules. Don't ask for too much. Don't expect too much. Be invisible. So I worked, tutoring, shelving books at the public library, saving every penny. The less I relied on them, the freer I felt. But even that freedom was fleeting. The summer after my freshman year at Wellesley, the call came. My father had collapsed in his office. Massive heart attack. I arrived at the hospital too late. They had already covered him with a sterile white sheet. I never got to say goodbye. The funeral was a performance. Victoria, in her designer mourning ensemble, clutched Madeline with trembling hands for the cameras. I stood apart, numb, while the family offered hollow condolences. But the real blow came at the reading of the will. To my beloved wife, Victoria, the lawyer read, voice impassive, the primary residence of personal effects and majority holdings. To my stepdaughter, Madeline, trust funds and real estate assets. And to me, a single sentence, enough to cover my remaining tuition and one small inheritance, barely a year's rent in Boston. Your father wanted you to understand the value of hard work, Victoria said later, lips pursed in a mimicry of sympathy. Madeline's needs are simply different. Different. Worth more, chosen. And in that moment I understood. The family that had once been mine had erased me, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a name. But names, I would learn, carried weight. And one day I would wield mine again. The weeks after my father's funeral were a blur of silence and empty rooms. Victoria made it clear that my presence in the house was temporary. You're an adult now, Aubrey, she said smoothly one morning over coffee. It's time you find your own place. Madeline had stood nearby, arms crossed, smirking. Don't worry about the holidays, she'd added. Our traditions are changing anyway. And just like that, the last fragile threads that tied me to my childhood unraveled. I packed my room alone. No one offered to help. No one stopped me. I took only what mattered. My mother's worn piano sheet music, a few photographs, and one small wooden box my father had once kept on his desk. Inside, I found a faded family photo. My father, my mother, and me at age 5, cheeks flushed with joy. Of a life long gone. I moved into a tiny studio apartment near Wellesley's campus and threw myself into work. Gallery internships, odd jobs, night classes, anything that would keep me moving forward, and for a while it was enough. I built a life without them, a fragile but fiercely earned independence. I graduated with honors and landed a position at Back Bay Gallery, a small but respected art space known for championing emerging artists. There, amidst canvases and sculptures, I found solace. Art had always been my refuge, one my mother had nurtured when I was small. Now it became my anchor, my voice in a world that had tried to silence me. I never spoke of my family, not to my colleagues, not to new friends. I carefully crafted a life where the name Bennett was just another echo of old money that meant nothing to me anymore, until the day Graham Pierce walked into the gallery. It had been an ordinary Tuesday. Gray skies, soft jazz playing in the background. I was cataloging a new collection when the bell above the door chimed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a rain-dampened coat and an easy smile, he approached a series of abstract paintings with genuine curiosity. "Can I help you find something?" I'd asked. "Just looking. But I'm curious about this artist," he replied, gesturing to a bold canvas, layered in blues and silvers. We spent nearly an hour, discussing the pieces. What struck me was not just his insight, but his attentiveness, and he listened, truly listened, in a way few ever had. It wasn't until he handed me his card that I realized who he was, Graham Pierce, founder of Pierce Innovations, one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs on the East Coast. Our coffee meeting led to dinner, then another. Slowly, without my intending it, Graham became part of my life. And for the first time in years, I began to believe that maybe I didn't have to carry the weight of my past alone. But the past had a way of creeping back. 6 years after my father's death, I had built a new life with Graham. We had married in a small ceremony in Brooklyn, surrounded by friends who knew nothing of the shadows behind my maiden name. And then, one crisp spring afternoon, a cream-colored envelope arrived in our mailbox. The Matthews Family Foundation. Victoria's handwriting. A gala invitation. A note. Harper, it's been too long. We should reconnect. The family misses you. My stomach twisted. She knows, I whispered when Graham came home that evening. Knows what? He asked, brow furrowed. That I'm your wife. That I didn't disappear after all. He studied the invitation, jaw tightening. We don't have to go. I want to, I said, surprising even myself. Not for them, for me, because some ghost needed to be faced head-on. A week later, as I zipped the midnight blue gown into its garment bag, Graham wrapped his arms around me. You're not going in as their victim, he murmured. You're going in as my wife. And in that moment, I believed him. But as the taxi neared the Rosewood Hotel that night, a single thought echoed in my mind. Was I truly ready to walk back into the lion's den? Will Aubrey truly find the strength to confront the family that once erased her, face to face under the harsh lights of their own gala? And when old wounds are forced open again, can she stand tall without losing the fragile sense of self she's fought so hard to rebuild? Stay with us, because in Chapter 3, The Night of Reckoning begins, and Aubrey's first steps back into the lion's den will test her like never before. Chapter 3, The Woman Who Walked Back In. Some ghosts arrive in ivory envelopes. The one on my kitchen counter was no different. But this time, I wasn't the girl who would run. I turned the envelope over in my hands for the third time that morning. The creamy paper felt heavier than it should have, as if soaked with years of unspoken words and memories that refused to die. Victoria's handwriting, smooth, elegant, unchanged. Aubrey, it began, it's been too long. We should reconnect. The family misses you. I almost laughed. Family, the same people who had watched me pack my childhood room, in silence, who had ensured my name vanished from every family photo, every holiday invitation. And yet here was Victoria, dangling an invitation like bait. She knows, I had whispered to Graham the night it arrived. Knows what? That I'm your wife, that I'm not gone. Now, 1 week later, the dress I'd chosen hung before me, sleek midnight blue, tailored perfectly. Not a revenge dress. A power dress. Are you sure about this? Graham asked, watching me from the doorway. His voice held no judgment, only concern. I am, I said quietly. Not for them. For me. The cab ride to the Rosewood Hotel was a blur of city lights and nerves. Remember, Graham had said before I left, his hands warm on my shoulders. You're not going in as their victim. You're going in as my wife. His words steadied me more than I'd expected. Still, my heart pounded as the hotel's gilded facade came into view. I'll come in later, Graham had insisted. Let them show their true colors first. I had agreed. If there was going to be reckoning, it needed to unfold on its own terms. Inside the lobby, a sea of black tie elegance swirled around me. Politicians, socialites, old money families whose names were etched into Boston's history. I inhaled deeply, straightened my shoulders, and moved toward the check-in table. Good evening, name please? The young woman asked, tablet in hand. Aubrey Bennett Pierce, I answered evenly. Her eyes scanned the list. A smile flickered. Yes, Mrs. Pierce, welcome. As I stepped into the ballroom, the hum of conversation faltered, just slightly. I could feel it. The subtle shift. The undercurrent of surprise. They hadn't expected me to show. Good. Aunt Patricia was the first familiar face I spotted, her eyes widening at the sight of me. "Aubrey?" she asked, voice tinged with disbelief. "It's been a while," I replied calmly. Yes, well, you look lovely." The hesitation in her voice spoke volumes. Around us, whispers began to ripple. "She's here, alone. Married? I thought she disappeared. Why would Victoria invite her?" I met each glance with quiet defiance. Near the center of the room, under the grand chandelier, stood Victoria, radiant in emerald, every inch the perfect hostess. Beside her, Madeline shimmered in crimson, phone already in hand. I could almost feel Victoria's gaze as she spotted me. For a brief second, her mask slipped, eyes narrowing, mouth tightening. Then the smile returned, polished, icy. "Aubrey," she called, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "What a surprise! I wasn't sure you'd come." It's an important cause," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Ooh, of course," she purred, though I must say it's rare to see gallery assistants at such events. The barb landed, but I didn't flinch. "I wear many hats," I said smoothly. Madeline's phone hovered, recording, already scripting the narrative they hoped to control. But tonight I wasn't here to play their game. I was here to reclaim my space. I moved further into the room, each step deliberate. Not a victim, not a shadow. And as I glanced at my watch, 10 more minutes until Graham would arrive. One truth rang clear in my mind. They had erased me once. They would not do it again. "Harper!" The name slipped from Uncle William's lips like an old habit as he approached with a wide grin and a glass of bourbon. "Good heavens, we thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth." "It's Aubrey now," I corrected gently. "And life has been busy." "Well, family is everything, you know," he said with a dismissive wave. "No matter how far you stray." I held his gaze, my smile polite. Family. The word had long since lost its warmth. Around us, the whispers thickened, threads weaving through the room like smoke. "She's here alone?" "I heard she married well. Some tech mogul?" "Why would Victoria invite her if—" Their curiosity buzzed beneath the polished surface of the evening. Victoria remained by the stage, speaking with a group of hospital board members, but her gaze flicked toward me, sharp and assessing. I could feel the tension building, an unseen net tightening with each passing moment. I must say, a familiar voice purred beside me. Madeline. She stood, impossibly close, crimson gown gleaming under the chandelier light. Phone still in hand, screen aglow. "We didn't think you'd actually show. Why send the invitation, then?" I asked evenly. She smiled, cold and thin. "Mother thought it polite. After all these years, of course she didn't think you'd have the nerve to come alone." "I'm not alone," I replied calmly. "My husband will be joining me shortly." That caught her off guard. For a flicker of a moment, the smirk faltered. "Husband," she echoed, eyes narrowing. "And who might that be?" "You'll meet him soon enough," I said, unwilling to offer her any more than that. Madeline's gaze sharpened. I could almost see the calculations behind her eyes. "We'll see," she said finally, stepping back into the swirl of the crowd. I took a steadying breath, fingers tightening around my clutch. Across the room, Aunt Janet lingered near a floral display. Her expression was softer, hesitant, almost regretful. But before I could approach, Victoria moved toward the small stage, taking the microphone with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out, "before we continue this wonderful evening, I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to all of you for your generous support of Boston Children's Hospital." Applause filled the room. "And of course," she continued smoothly, "none of this would be possible without the dedication of our staff, our planners, our catering team, and our serving staff. A ripple of polite laughter followed, then her eyes locked onto mine. In fact, she added with a smile dripping with false concern, I believe there may have been a small misunderstanding tonight. One of our wait staff seems to have misplaced her uniform. The words sliced through the air. Murmurs swelled, heads turned. Phones rose. I stood frozen for half a heartbeat, then straightened my spine. I was invited, I said clearly, voice steady despite the thrum of adrenaline. Officially. Of course, Victoria replied sweetly. We send courtesy invitations to extended family, but sometimes misunderstandings happen. She gestured discreetly toward the entrance. Michael, the security guard from earlier, began making his way through the crowd. Please, Victoria said to him, escort Miss Bennett out. Gently, of course. She is family after all, technically speaking. Laughter rippled through the room, sharper this time. Don't worry, Harper, Madeline called. Maybe next year you'll earn a real invite. I forced a breath, my pulse hammering. Please, I whispered to Michael as he reached me. My husband is arriving. Just give me a moment. He hesitated. Ma'am? Please, I repeated. Behind us, Victoria's voice floated once more. Family tragedy, really. Some people never find their place. I glanced at my watch. 5 more minutes. Hold on. Will Graham arrive in time to shatter the carefully crafted facade that Victoria has built around this night? And when every eye in the room is watching, can one woman's quiet strength withstand the weight of a family determined to erase her? Stay tuned, because in Chapter 4, a single name will change everything, and the battle for dignity will unfold before an audience that can never unsee what happens next. Chapter 4, The Name That Changed the Room. Mrs. Reed, Graham's voice echoed across the ballroom. Are you all right? And just like that, the room that had mocked me fell silent. But that moment had not arrived yet. Not 5 minutes ago, Michael's hand had hovered uncertainly at my elbow, caught between duty and decency. Please, I whispered again, he'll be here, just give me a moment. Michael shifted, uncertain. Ma'am? It's all right, I added, voice low. You don't want this scene tied to your name tomorrow. That made him pause. The phones trained on us, the murmured gasps from polished mouths, the poised socialists pretending not to eavesdrop. He saw them too. I can wait by the door, I said. He's coming. Michael gave a faint nod. 1 minute. I glanced at my watch. 3 minutes left. Behind me, Victoria's voice floated across the room, practiced and smooth. Family tragedy, really. Some people simply never find their place, she told a cluster of guests with just enough volume to reach my ears. Uncle William snorted. Always trying to be something she's not. Some things never change, added Cousin Brandon loud enough for others to hear. Madeline's camera remained fixed on me, documenting each humiliating second. I stood tall, refusing to give them the spectacle they craved. If I was going down tonight, I would not go down small. She's lying about this husband. Madeline's voice rose. Have you seen any posts? No wedding, no photos, just that tiny gallery job. She trailed off, scanning her phone with obvious glee. Pathetic. Cousin Brandon chimed in again. Crashing a gala just to feel important. My fingers curled tighter around the velvet clutch. Inside, the invitation felt like a hollow shield. You don't belong here, Victoria said smoothly, stepping closer now, voice honeyed with venom. You never did. I met her gaze, steady. You may think you erased me, but I'm not leaving. The faintest flicker crossed her face, 1 second of faltering control. Then, as if on cue, the ballroom doors swung open. A hush rippled through the crowd, and there he was, Graham Pierce. 6'2", broad-shouldered, sharp in a tailored midnight tuxedo, his stride purposeful, gaze scanning the room until it locked on me. Mrs. Reed! His voice rang out, calm, clear, resonant. Are you all right? Gasps swept through the crowd. Phones rose higher. Victoria's smile froze mid-sentence. Madeline's mouth parted. In disbelief, Michael straightened instantly, hand falling away from my arm. I exhaled, slow, deliberate, as Graham crossed the floor. With each step, the whispers grew louder. That's Graham Pierce. Pierce Innovations! The anonymous donor could... Her husband? Graham reached me and took my hand firmly in his. You okay? He asked, voice low but audible enough for the front rows to hear. I am now, I answered softly. His gaze flicked to Michael. Thank you, I'll take it from here. Michael gave a short nod, relief flickering across his features. And in that instant, I knew. The game had changed. The room knew it too. Victoria recovered first, smoothing her expression with well-honed grace. Mr. Pierce, she greeted with outstretched hand. What an unexpected honor. I'm Victoria Bennett. We haven't met, but I... Graham's reply came crisp and cool. Mrs. Bennett, I know exactly who you are. Mrs. Bennett, I know exactly who you are. The words sliced through the tension-heavy air, as sharp and deliberate as a blade. Victoria's smile wavered, a flicker of unease flashing in her eyes. But she recovered quickly. Years of public life had trained her well. Well, then, she said smoothly, I'm delighted to finally meet you, though I must apologize. We were just addressing a small misunderstanding here. Were you? Graham asked, voice level but cool. Because what I witnessed just now looked far more like an attempt to publicly humiliate my wife. Gasps whispered through the crowd. The word wife seemed to echo across the ballroom, shattering whatever narrative Victoria had carefully woven all evening. I could see Madeline stiffen, her phone lowering involuntarily. Wife? Someone near the front whispered. She married Graham Pierce. He's the anonymous donor, isn't he? The murmurs grew louder. Victoria held on to her composure with a grip that seemed to tighten by the second. Mr. Pierce? Graham, she began, her voice tinged with false warmth. Surely you understand family dynamics can be complicated. Harper, Aubrey, has always been a bit difficult. If we'd known she was your wife, of course. You would have treated her with basic respect, only if my name preceded hers. Graham cut in, voice calm, controlled, devastating. That speaks volumes about your values, Mrs. Bennett. A visible shift rippled through the room. A few board members exchanged glances. Phones still hovered mid-air, recording every word. You must understand, Victoria tried again, but Graham raised a hand, slightly, enough to silence her. For those of you unaware, he addressed the crowd now, voice carrying effortlessly, I am Graham Pierce, founder of Pierce Innovations and the Pierce Foundation. My foundation is the anonymous benefactor behind this evening's gala. Another wave of gasps surged across the ballroom. We supported this event because we believe in the mission of Boston Children's Hospital, not because we seek publicity or status. His gaze swept the room. However, seeing my wife, who is also the daughter of the man whose name this foundation bears, being treated as an outsider and ridiculed in front of Boston's elite, that I will not tolerate. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the clicks of cameras. Victoria's mask was crumbling. Her voice came thinner now. Graham, surely this is a misunderstanding. I heard everything Graham said flatly. So did everyone else in this room. You called my wife's staff. You encouraged security to remove her. Your daughter filmed it for entertainment. Madeleine flushed scarlet, fingers tightening around her phone. It was a mistake. Victoria tried again, but the weakness in her voice betrayed her. We didn't know. And that, Graham finished for her, is exactly the problem. He turned once more to the wider audience. No one should need wealth or a powerful name to be treated with dignity, least of all by their own family. A few guests nodded visibly, Board members of the hospital shifted in their seats. Let me be clear, Graham continued. Pierce Foundation's continued support for Boston Children's Hospital is not in question. But going forward, we will require restructuring of the event committee to ensure this evening's behavior is not repeated. Now the board members sat up straighter. Victoria's face drained of color. You can't do that, she stammered. The Matthews Family Foundation exists because of my father's work, I spoke up. Voice steady now. Work I was systematically cut out from after his death, that ends tonight. Silence thicker than any before descended, but just as the tension began to settle, Madeline, face pale, voice low but sharp, leaned toward me as Graham turned back toward the hospital directors. You think this is over? She hissed. Watch your back! Will Madeline's warning prove to be an empty threat, or is a deeper game about to unfold behind the crumbling facade of the Bennett family? And when old rivalries resurface in new, more dangerous forms, how far would you go to finally reclaim the legacy that was stolen from you? Stay with us, because in Chapter 5, long-buried truths will rise, and Aubrey must decide how much more she's willing to fight for a name that still carries the weight of her father's love. If you destroy the Pierce Foundation's trust in this event, Victoria warned, you'll ruin your father's name. No, I said, I'm saving it. The morning after the gala dawned gray and cold, a fitting backdrop for the storm still swirling in my mind. I stood by the window of our Brooklyn apartment, coffee cooling in my hands, as news alerts began to ping across my phone. Pierce Foundation CEO confronts gala host in public showdown. Graham Pierce's wife revealed as estranged Bennett heiress. Matthews Family Foundation under fire for public humiliation of donor's wife. Each headline carried the weight of a moment I still replayed in my head. Graham's voice cutting through the room. Victoria's mask cracking. Madeline's whispered threat. Watch your back. I shivered, not from fear, but from resolve. You okay? Graham asked softly, wrapping his arms around me. I will be, I replied, but we're not done yet. He kissed the side of my head. Tell me what you need. I need to make sure my father's name means something again. Something good. Later that afternoon, we met with the board of the Pierce Foundation at their Manhattan offices, a sleek glass tower, far removed from the marble and pretense of the Bennett world. Our support for Boston Children's Hospital will continue, Graham told the board firmly, but with conditions. Conditions? One director asked. Restructuring the gala committee. Transparency in leadership, and no further association with the Matthews Family Foundation until such measures are met, he stated. And Aubrey? Another member asked gently. Aubrey is establishing a new initiative under our foundation, Graham replied, glancing at me with a quiet smile. One that honors her father's true legacy. My heart pounded, but I spoke clearly. We will be launching the Thomas Bennett Art Therapy Foundation, dedicated to providing healing through the arts for children dealing with grief and trauma. It was something my father believed in deeply, and something I know he would want his name attached to. The board members nodded, their expressions thoughtful. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of empowerment. Not borrowed from Graham, but built from within. That evening, I received a message from an unexpected name. Janet, can we talk? Over coffee? I owe you an apology. I stared at the screen, torn. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But another part, one I couldn't deny, wanted answers. We met the next morning at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, tucked away from the city's noise. Aunt Janet arrived, looking thinner, more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes held a weariness that wasn't just age. Thank you for seeing me, she began, voice soft. I owe you, more than you know. Why now? I asked, keeping my tone even. She sighed. Because I saw what happened last night, and because I've stayed silent for too long. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. Aubrey, I knew what Victoria was doing to you after Thomas died. We all did. Some of us were too afraid to confront her. Others convinced ourselves it wasn't our place. You could have stopped it, I said quietly. I know, she whispered, eyes glistening. And I'm so sorry. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small bundle of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. He never stopped loving you, she said, voice breaking. These were letters your father wrote, letters Victoria kept from you. My fingers trembled as I untied the faded blue ribbon. The stack of envelopes smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, my father's study, resurrected in a single breath. I swallowed hard and drew in the familiar scent. I found them in Thomas's private desk, months after the funeral, Janet said softly. I wanted to give them to you then, but Victoria had everyone watching. I wasn't brave enough. Why now? I whispered, barely trusting my voice. Because last night I saw who you've become, she replied. Not broken, strong. I couldn't keep them from you any longer. Tears blurred my vision as I unfolded the first letter. My dearest Aubrey, the opening line read, the handwriting achingly familiar. If you're reading this, it means I wasn't strong enough to protect you from what was coming, and for that I will never forgive myself. The words stabbed deep. You are everything good that Jessica and I ever created. Never believe otherwise. Never let them make you small. I pressed a hand to my mouth, breath catching in my throat. He never forgot you, Janet whispered, not for a second. I wiped my tears and folded the letter with reverence. Thank you, I managed. You've given me more than you know. There's more to reclaim than just a name, Janet added, her voice firming. If you need me, I'm with you now. For the first time in years, I believed her. Later that afternoon, Graham and I met with key members of the Boston Children's Hospital Board. The air in the conference room was taut with unspoken tension. We'd like to clarify the future direction of our foundation's involvement, Graham began, his tone calm but unyielding. The board members nodded, visibly eager to distance themselves from the previous night's scandal. The Pierce Foundation will continue its support, Graham continued, but under new terms. Effective immediately, we expect a restructuring of the gala's organizing committee. And Mrs. Bennett? One board member asked, cautiously. Will no longer serve in a leadership capacity tied to any Pierce Foundation initiatives, Graham said, gaze unwavering. That is non-negotiable, murmurs rippled through the room. Several members exchanged looks of clear relief. And on a personal note, Graham added, pausing for emphasis, my wife will be launching the Thomas Bennett Art Therapy Foundation in partnership with the hospital. All eyes turned to me. The foundation will provide art therapy programs for children dealing with grief and trauma, I explained. Programs my father once dreamed of supporting. It's a beautiful mission, one member said warmly, and a much-needed one. The board members nodded in agreement. We'll draft the necessary amendments, he added, and we fully support your family's vision moving forward. Relief surged through me, tempered by determination. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. That evening, Graham and I returned home, exhaustion and adrenaline battling beneath my skin. You were extraordinary, he whispered as he poured us each a glass of wine. I had help, I replied, leaning into his warmth. I glanced at the stack of letters resting on the coffee table. So much lost time, but now, finally, a path forward. It's not over yet, I said softly. No, Graham agreed, but tonight you took the first step toward rewriting the story they tried to erase. As the clock neared midnight, my phone buzzed. A new message. Madeline, you think this changes anything? Watch your back. The Bennetts don't forget. I stared at the screen, heart steady. Let them remember, I whispered. So will I. Will Madeline's latest threat signal the beginning of a deeper war, or has the battle for Thomas Bennett's legacy only just begun? And when the wounds of the past collide with newfound strength, can Aubrey truly protect what she has reclaimed without losing herself once more? Stay with us. Because in Chapter 6, the fight to define her family's name reaches its most pivotal moment, and the line between closure and confrontation grows thinner than ever. Chapter 6, The Family I Now Choose. Blood doesn't make a family, I said that night, raising my glass. Love does. 6 months had passed since that night at the Rosewood Hotel. 6 months that had felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Boston's spring air carried the first hints of warmth as I stood in the sun-dappled atrium of Boston Children's Hospital, preparing to take a step my father had once only dreamed of. Today wasn't about the Bennetts or what they had taken. Today was about what I was giving back. "You ready?" Graham asked softly, brushing a stray curl from my cheek. I nodded, the familiar blend of nerves and resolve tightening in my chest. "I think so. It's time." The newly dedicated Thomas Bennett Art Therapy Wing gleamed with life. Children's artwork lined the walls, bold strokes of color, tiny handprints transformed into flowers, skies, suns. It was a space of healing, of hope, a place where grief could find its voice through creation. And today, it bore my father's name for the right reasons. A small gathering of donors, hospital staff, and trusted friends had come to celebrate the wing's launch. No flashing cameras, no society page vultures, just people who understood the mission. Among them stood Aunt Janet, her presence a quiet anchor. "You've built something beautiful here," she whispered when we hugged. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so," I said, voice thick with emotion. "I know so." When it was time, I took the small stage beneath a banner that read, "Thomas Bennett Art Therapy Foundation, a place to heal." I steadied my breath and began. For many years, I believed that a family name defined who you were, or who you were allowed to be, I said, scanning the room. But over time, I learned that it's what we choose to do with that name that truly matters. I paused, the weight of unspoken years pressing behind my words. This space is dedicated to every child who carries grief they can't yet name, to every family learning how to rebuild after loss. And for me, this is about reclaiming a legacy that once meant the world to a little girl who lost far too soon. I caught Graham's gaze in the crowd, unwavering. "Family isn't about blood," I continued. "It's about who shows up, who lifts you when you fall, who reminds you of your worth when the world tries to erase it. Today, I choose that family." Applause rose gently, a warm tide of understanding. After the ceremony, Janet approached again, her eyes shimmering. "He loved you so much," she whispered. "I wish I'd done more back then." "You're here now," I said simply. "That matters." As we spoke, Graham joined us, slipping his arm around my waist. "You were incredible," he murmured. "Your father would have been honored." "Thank you," I breathed. Across the room, staff members began ushering in small groups of children and families for their first art sessions. Laughter bubbled, brushes dipped into bright paints, tiny fingers creating new worlds. For the first time in years, I felt a peace I hadn't thought possible. "You did this," Graham whispered. "We did," I corrected with a smile. But as the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, my phone buzzed. Another message. "Madeline, see you at the next gala." I stared at the screen, smile fading. The past wasn't finished with me yet. "See you at the next gala." Madeline's message burned on my screen long after the last guest had gone. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table beside me. For tonight, I refused to let her poison linger. "Everything okay?" Graham asked quietly, returning from saying goodbye to a few board members. "A minor irritation," I said with a faint smile. "Not worth spoiling this day." He tilted his head, reading the truth behind my words. We'll face whatever comes. Together. I know, I said, reaching for his hand. And that makes all the difference. Later that evening, our apartment in Brooklyn hummed with a quiet, comforting warmth. The walls no longer echoed with the ghosts of the Bennett name. They held something better now. Laughter, love, resilience. Janet sat curled on our couch, a mug of tea in her hands. I still can't believe it, she said softly. The wing, the children's faces. Thomas would be so proud. He'd be grateful you're here, I replied gently. I am too. I almost didn't come today, Janet admitted. Part of me feared what they'd say. They have no power anymore, I said firmly. Not here, not with us. Graham entered the room with a small tray of pastries. Consider this our very own post-gala celebration, he announced, setting down with a grin. You're spoiling us, Janet laughed. She deserves every bit of it, Graham said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to truly exhale. The following week, the Thomas Bennett Art Therapy Wing welcomed its first full group of children. I spent hours at the hospital watching tiny fingers mold clay, brush vibrant colors across blank canvases, giggle through the swirl of creative discovery. Art helps me talk when I don't have words, one little boy told me, his eyes wide and earnest. I blinked back tears and smiled. That's exactly why we built this place. Word of the new foundation spread quickly. Donations began flowing in from those who had witnessed the gala and those who believed in this new chapter. Even former Bennett associates reached out. Some with genuine regret, others perhaps seeking proximity to this rising tide. I accepted only the former. We choose our family, I reminded Graham one night as we reviewed partnership proposals. And we guard it fiercely, he agreed. A month after the opening, Graham surprised me with a small gathering in our home. No gala gowns, no staged photographs, just laughter, warmth, and the people who had stood beside us. Janet arrived first, arms full of fresh flowers. A house needs color, she said with a wink. Friends from the gallery brought wine and stories. Members of the hospital board shared quiet congratulations, and Graham's sister, Emma, whom I had come to see as the sister I never had, wrapped me in a hug that spoke volumes. This is your family now, she whispered. We're so proud of you. Thank you, I managed, my heart full to the brim. As the evening wore on, I caught Graham's gaze across the room. He raised his glass, eyes shining. To my wife, he said softly, who reminds us all that sometimes the family we choose is the one that saves us. The toast echoed through the room. To chosen family, everyone replied in unison. Much later, after the last guest had left and the apartment had settled into quiet, I curled up beside Graham on the couch. Do you think they'll ever stop? I asked softly, thinking of Madeline's message. Maybe, he said. But even if they don't, it doesn't matter anymore. You've already won. I rested my head on his shoulder. Yes, I whispered. But I'll be ready if they try again. Across the room, my phone buzzed once more. Another message. Madeline. We're not finished. I stared at the words, calm now. Neither mine, I whispered.